Good morning. We are going to start our program respectful of everyone's time, and I know that President Halonen of Finland needs to leave a bit early to go to the United Nations for important work on a panel. So welcome to all of you. I am Mary. Please come up to the stage. Mary Robinson. Okay. I'm Jane Harmon, the first director, president, and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars, who happens to be a woman. Applause are welcome. Thank you. Unlike the Lincoln Memorial or the Washington Monument, the Woodrow Wilson Center is a living memorial to our 28th president and provides an essential link between the worlds of scholarship and policymaking. President Wilson once said, "My dream of politics all my life has been that it is the common business, that it is something we owe to each other to understand and discuss with absolute frankness." That statement is equally true today, 100 years later, and it seems natural to all of us that women were people he should have been talking about. When women play a prominent role in politics and policy making, both improve. But in President Wilson's time, just to remind you, women had few rights. The fight over suffrage occurred on his watch, and biographers say that at first he, imagine this, he was reluctant. It was his daughters who pushed him. So as the daughters of his daughters of his daughters, we have to keep pushing. Not just in our country, where we have never elected a woman president. We've only had one woman on the presidential ticket of a major party, and that was Geraldine Ferraro, a dear, beloved friend to many of us in 1984. Not just in our country, but obviously all around the world. All of us here have made some cracks in the glass ceiling. Last night, a few of us had dinner, and I think it was Laura Liswood who said that the ceiling is just a bunch of a thick layer of men. That's it. I knew I would blow it. But nonetheless, it has taken a while to get through that layer. And no doubt each of us has a relative, an older relative, who would have, had she had the opportunity, been a great leader. But today we're celebrating the 15th anniversary of a very unique thing, and it's called the Council of World Women Leaders, formed by Laura Liswood, whom we'll hear from later and whom we honored last night, to be the group of women who have been and are heads of state and heads of government. That group is tiny. Obviously, it has zero participation at the head of state level from our country. But since 1960, when women began to be democratically elected heads of state, we think there have been about 50, 46 of whom belong to this group. So this is the group that represents women who have achieved the very top of political leadership in the world. Someone asked me last night, so what's the point? And here's the point in just 3 parts. One, the point of this group is to help these people network. As someone who served 9 terms in our Congress, I know how hard it is and how lonely it is to be a leader, even at the level where I was a leader. This is a much bigger deal than that. And women, obviously, can learn from other women. Second point is to connect this group, the power of this group, the most senior political women on the planet, to the many policy organizations, some of which people in this room head or participate in, that are working on opportunities for women to lead and to advocate. We don't need to replicate these groups. We need to help leverage these groups. And women at the very top, committed to leveraging the power of women's policy organizations, can get that job done. Third point, though, and I think that's the one that excites most of us in this panel, we'll discuss it in part, is to make certain that these women are able to teach and to learn from the emerging women leaders around the globe. And many of those leaders are emerging in the in the Middle East region, and we will touch on that today. And sometime later this year, we will hold a conference in Abu Dhabi to celebrate this notion that women leaders can be a force multiplier for emerging women leaders. If you've got a button, read your button and wear your button and think about how you personally can be a force multiplier. Finally, let me just mention that this wonderful organization relocated to the Wilson Center in September. We had an initial conference at UNGA in New York at the Finnish consulate, and there we were joined by some of the women you'll meet today, and also by Milan Verveer, who is the senior person at the State Department responsible for outreach to women, and is the former head herself of Vital Voices and the former chief of staff to Hillary Clinton. And earlier this morning, Wendy Sherman, who's the Undersecretary of State for Policy, as she said, the first woman ever to have this role. We are partnering with the U.S. Department of State. We are partnering with other governments like the UAE, we at the Wilson Center, to make sure that this council can be as visible and important as possible, a factor not just in the United States, but hopefully around the world, because we get it that if you're going to have a center for international affairs, that center has to value and feature the roles of women. So on that point, let me introduce, for brief remarks, because she has to leave early to go up to the UN, she will explain, the current chair of the council, who is President Tarja Halonen of the country of Finland. President Halonen joined the Social Democratic Party in 1971. Her political career began in 1974 when she was appointed parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister of Finland. She was elected to Finland's parliament for the first time in 1979, re-elected 4 times before her election as president. A few years ago, President Halonen visited a kindergarten full of very precocious children. She knows I'm going to tell this story again. I'm going to tell this story every single time I see her. She asked the girls what they wanted to be when they grew up. President, they declared. Then she asked one little boy what he wanted to be, and he responded, downcast, I can't be what I want to be. Only girls get to be president of Finland. Please welcome President Tarja Halonen of Finland.
Thank you, every one of you who have come here. I start with a very personal thing. I confess, I was very worried when I heard first time that this our council would perhaps move to Washington. If you are the mother of the 15 years old daughter, you know that yes, it's nice. It will be the time to move away, but then with whom they will be? And then I thought also that, yeah, of course, the Washington is a wonderful place, but it's a big place anyway. And we have so much use that it's in Aspens, and we have used to have the home in other place. Then I met Jen Harman, and I said, no, yeah, very good. I think that it will be a good company. And yesterday and today, when I met all of you, many of you, so I'm quite relaxed. I know that our daughter will be with a good company. But I do hope also that you understand what I mean, that I hope that she will grow up, she will become bigger, more independent, give support not only to herself but also to the others. And you, ladies, and few brave gentlemen here, you are those we feel that we will give our daughter to live with. So this is not certainly the last time we will meet, but and perhaps in Finland they will get now the next president in March, who is a man. But this is my second topic concerning men. So you cannot choose your gender, but you can choose to become a feminist. And I expect that not only women but also the men are for the equal rights, for more equal society, and also helping those who could have a capacity, but what the circumstances don't allow, to help them, whether they are men or women. So women are a little bit more than 50% of the world's population. And we have said that it would be really a loss to neglect this amount of the resources. And we want that the whole world will use them. But of course, dear gentlemen, you are the 49% of the resources, so we don't leave you. So I think that my role here is very briefly tell that how we have felt all this work so far before it will grow more here in Washington. So the first, I have put it in a short way. What is to feel to be I, me? And I think that everyone who has tried to make a so-called career in business or in public sector or wherever, and they feel sometimes when they hear all those critics, what will come, certainly will come. So they think that, oh, I'm really like that if it's just me who feels in that way. And this is the sisterhood, or this is the partnership what we are giving. That no, it's not you. It's partly you, but it happens to everyone. You make all your speeches well, and then when you have your first speech in Congress, so the first comment you will get, it's not concerning your speech, but perhaps how you look like. When I paid my first state visit to our neighboring country, Sweden, so I thought everything was very well, and the discussions were excellent and so on. And then I saw the first women's magazine, they said that I had too big handbag. Okay, that happens, but not after that, I can tell. Then the second point is that sometimes you feel that the world is not fair. My mother used to say to me when we kids said in Finland, which was the part of the Europe after the Second World War. So we said, oh, that's not fair, that's not good. So she said, yes, my dear, the life is not fair, but that's why we are here, to make the world better. Sometimes hard to listen, but true. You can say that was not fair. You don't need to think that it's me. The life is not always fair. But we are here, not only you, but we, to help you to make the world better. Then the third point is that what is we? We have a different kind of the people here, that's very nice, very good. Of course, those who need our help the most, we should be there. Whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Northern Africa, whether it's in Sudan, wherever it is. That's true. Let's be brave, but let's show the solidarity. But let's not become home blind. Just today I received news from my own home country, and I asked that what's the latest news, and then my media boss, hey, Eila, stand up. So she is just a correct person if you want to have a contact what's the European Union. She has worked more than 10 years, both with the EU Commission and then in the EU Parliament with the group. So she knows very well what's kind of the animal the European Union is. So she said that again this kind of the family violence has been in the news. And even we are in the country where we have 50-50 men and women in the government. We were the first or the second country in the world where the women get the full political rights. Already in the first Finnish parliament, we were not quite even yet independent. It was an independence campaign. Out of 200 members of the parliament, so 19 were already women. Now we have more than 40% of the women are the members of the parliament. So we really have had already in the history one government where we had a slight majority of the women in the government, but that was just occasionally. So I mean, we are really in many sectors. We are well known as a country which has been pioneering, like Sweden or Norway or Denmark. But it's not a paradise. It's not a paradise. Family violence still exists. There is still all kind of the bad things what we should brush away. And this is now third time when I say it's necessary that we are strong, we women that we are strong. But we cannot stop men to kill their nearest ones. We cannot stop them either in the armed conflict to do what they are doing today. We need brave, democratic, progressive men who are ready to move, to make a new role for the men. And that's democracy, that they do it. But we can change also the role of us. And we can be brave so that we say that you don't behave like that with me, but we need the both sides here. This sounds very Nordic, of course. I'm a Nordic. So I think that when we will have this excellent panel where Mary Robinson, who is not older than me, but who I have always considered to be a certain kind of the political big sister to me, because she started earlier. And what she has done better than me is that they got also the second Mary to be a president. I think we have not the second Tarja in Finland.
Now we have a man.
Not yet.
Now we have a man.
Yeah, now you have a man. The men are also capable. So that's the way. She has done a lot of work. Margot Wallstrom was with Mary and many others you have heard here. We were in Monrovia, in Liberia, when this Monrovia meeting was made. We thought, I told yesterday more lengthy, we thought that how it can happen in Liberia, where they have had just a very long 30 years civil war and all that. And my good friends said when they took telephone calls, they said that you should see this. I mean, yes, you know that it has been the war, but all the places, they still are just like they would just stop the war. And then a week later, when we were there, I said, yeah, I see these big amounts of the rubbish there and all these broken houses, but this is, I mean, quite clean and fine. And they said that, yes. The ladies used the last week to clean up the places, to clean up the home, the Monrovia, in order to show us that we are welcome friends to their home. And all this signal told, all in details, that they wanted to tell, to manifestate, the war is over and the future is in our hands. And in that way, please don't underestimate the importance also what we have the feminine traditions. I don't mean that you have to cook all your coffees and make your biscuits and so on, but don't underestimate the importance of the caring. And that's something what both women and men should learn. So it's not that you try to do the man's work better. You have to do that, but you can make the difference. Thank you. And why I'm leaving to the New York is that I'm co-chairing the high-level panel of the sustainable development, and I have promised to Ban Ki-moon that we will do it ready tomorrow. So keep your fingers.
So Tarja Halonen can obviously sustain the world while she also supports freedom and equality for women. Thank you very much, President Halonen, for joining us. And now, for the main act of the morning, many mornings I'm on my treadmill watching Morning Joe, and guess whose shining face is there? Tina Brown. How many of you watch Tina Brown on Morning Joe? We'll do a little poll. Yes. And she tells me how I should think about the world. And she also tells me that as my sister and a kind of partner at Newsweek Daily Beast, where she's doing a magnificent job to save a legacy publication and to take digital journalism to the next level. And she's doing a magnificent job with an annual Women of the World conference that some of you may have attended in the past 2 years. It's then featured in Newsweek. But this year, this tiny little conference is going to be held at Lincoln Center. So that tells you how far that has come. And there is a new Women in the World Foundation. Tina may talk about that. That, again, will take many of these issues and give them huge visibility. And, of course, we'll work with the Council on World Women Leaders and other groups. This is what I'm talking about Force Multiplier, to use the enormous talent of women at the very top and the relationship among women's organizations and women trying to promote freedom and equality to help a new emerging class of women, one of whom is right here, and you'll hear about her in a minute. So Tina, before Newsweek Daily Beast, was also editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair, the first female editor of The New Yorker in its 73-year history, and she hosted CNBC's A Topic with Tina Brown. I don't think there's anything this woman cannot do. Please welcome Tina Brown.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane. Well, thank you so much, Jane. I must say I am so inspired by what is happening here with bringing the Council of Women Leaders, Women World Leaders, Laura Listron's wonderful brainchild, into Woodrow Wilson. And what really is exciting in a way is to see how Jane Harman, within months of taking over as CEO, I mean, talk about a transformative action as a woman. Almost one of her first moves was to go after the Council of Women World Leaders and bring them into the center, making a very bold statement immediately that women were now going to be absolutely core and absolutely influential at the Woodrow Wilson Center and her vision of the center. So I think it's really thrilling that this is really happening, and I'm very, very honored to be here at, as Jane mentioned, at the Newsweek Daily Beast. We do have this annual Women in the World Summit, which we began, where we bring together incredible women with inspiring stories who are doing amazing things and showcasing them on the stage to tell their stories. Well, that we now have a foundation, and that foundation is going to be doing very much the same kind of work that Jane is talking about here, bringing women together, creating great networks, mentoring women, being able to create scholarships, being able to create opportunities for women to meet each other and become, as Jane said, force multipliers. Well, we have some incredible women here on the stage today who are certainly force multipliers. Mary Robinson, of course, who you all know, president of the Mary Robinson Foundation now, Climate Justice, and former president of Ireland, who has a post-presidency really that's been every bit as influential as her time in office. She's a member of the Elders now, and she's taken on fighting ritual child brides and spoke brilliantly about that at the Clinton Global Initiative this year. And of course, she's also a passionate crusader against the impact of climate change. So this is Mary Robinson. And then next to her, the Honourable Margot Wallstrom, United Nations Special Representative to the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict, who after a very distinguished career in politics in Sweden has brought her firepower to the battle against rape as a weapon of war. And then we come to the future generation of leaders, Sabrina Roshan, who recently graduated from the Council of Women World Leaders, a graduate program, and program coordinator for the Africa region, practice poverty reduction and economic management now at the World Bank. So we're thrilled to have these three terrific women here. We've all been so inspired, I think, by what we've seen happening with women all over the Middle East, the way they're in the forefront of these protests. We've been inspired by what we saw in Tahrir Square, but we've also been absolutely enraged to see how those same women who created a revolution and helped to create that revolution in Egypt have then been sort of left out of the whole action, it seems now, and have not got a power seat at the table. So I think it does behoove us all to think about what we can keep doing to keep on making women able to take it to the next level. And I'd like to just ask first, because Jane Harman did allude to it in her remarks. She said she referred to Geraldine Ferraro, who was a great influence on her in her political career, and how Congresswoman Ferraro, who then, of course, famously reached almost the highest moment when she became a vice presidential candidate, just how important learning can be from another woman who can really teach you things, teach you the tricks, teach you the the navigations and inspire you by their, not just by their example, but by the lessons that they've learned on their way to the top. And so I just thought I would, before we get into other issues, I just thought I would ask each of the women on the platform if there is any woman that really has been a very seminal force in their own lives in terms of learning as a lead to be a leader. Mary, I'll start with you.
Well, from a human rights point of view, I think I would put Eleanor Roosevelt up there as being very inspirational. But when I was seeking to get votes for being the first woman to be elected President of Ireland, the Irish bookmakers told me that I was 100 to 1 outsider, and they meant 1,000 to 1. They were just gentlemen, so they didn't make it too. And the one woman that I was able to look to as a kind of mentor, a kind of precedent, if you like, was Vigdis Finnbogadóttir, who was the first woman elected in Iceland, and we became very good friends afterwards. And she was the first chair of the council. In fact, I was at the meeting in Stockholm in 1996, where Laura Liswood had interviewed a number of us and written a book, and we were brought together to see could we make women's leadership more visible. And we decided to form the council. Laura helped to establish it, and Vigdis became the first chair of it. And I've often asked audiences like this, when I'm speaking about women's leadership, I mention the Council of Women World Leaders, and I think that's quite a mouthful. Wow, Council of Women World Leaders. And I say, yes, it's women who've been elected President or Prime Minister. How many do you think there are? Now, Jane, earlier you were talking about tiny, but actually I find that the estimates of the audience are that it's much smaller than it actually is. I usually get 5, 11, 13. Now we know that there are 45, isn't that right, Laura? 45 members currently, present like President Tarja Halonen and former presidents or prime ministers. And we also have the ministerial level, which Madeleine Albright first chaired and now chaired by Margot Wallstrom. But, Vigdis was the influence as far as I'm concerned. But now what interests me more is innovative forms of leadership. And before President Tarja Halonen leaves, I'd like to just refer to the meeting that she mentioned in Liberia, the International Symposium in January 2009, because that was an innovative leadership that she played a huge role in. She was a sitting president of Finland who joined with the president of Liberia. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf could not have done this on her own. It took a big commitment of a European sitting president to say this is important. And there were quite a number of skeptics at the time who said, look, Liberia is a post-conflict country with a lot of problems. What is it doing having an international symposium? And the Council of Women World Leaders rode in hard. But actually that was an extremely important meeting for Liberia, as we know. And it was very moving to see how it energized and dignified women in Liberia. They really felt they were people, they were important. And that was the kind of inspirational type of innovative leadership that I think we need to see more of, and I hope the Council can contribute to.
Right, that's really interesting about the dignified, and I know that very much, when you see it so much in Hillary Clinton's travels, the way, like in Yemen, for instance, one of my colleagues was with her in Yemen and said how remarkable it was that these women just surged around the secretary and told her again and again how her role and what she meant, and her coming there and her talking to them absolutely inspired them to think again about how they were trying to lead and so on. So it is incredibly important. Margot, is there a woman in your memory or heart who has played a big role in in your own career and thinking about being a leader?
What about Mom? I guess this is important to all of us if we get the support from our mothers and also from our fathers, because from your book, Laura, we learned that most of those women that you interviewed talked about the role of their fathers to encourage their daughters.
Margaret Thatcher was
to pursue a career. So that is very important. But I would say one of my few role models, women politicians, is sitting next to me, because Mary has been an inspiration to me throughout. But I was actually not looking to political leaders very much for inspiration. When I grew up or when I started in politics, I was more impressed by writers, women writers, and so I have not looked that much to politicians for leadership. But I want to add one thing to what Mary said, and that is it is so important to allow women leaders to succeed. we get them elected, but the whole idea was also to give Ellen Johnson Sirleaf a chance to succeed in leading her country. So we must also pursue and make sure that we are there to show solidarity and to back them up so that they can make a difference. And I believe more and more in quotas. I am more and more militant for quotas because I don't see why a system where men choose men is fairer than quotas. Why would that be humiliating to any woman to be chosen because you would represent half of the population, more than half of the population?
Well, it certainly seems to have been effective in Finland. In fact, you're sitting there, but I might just go to you here in the audience because I know you're going to leave soon. President Halonen, has the quota system in Finland been very effective, in a sense, in changing the culture of the country and the politics of the country?
So I can't tell what it is when you are too arrogant. We thought that when we were the first country, New Zealanders always say that they were first, but we think we were first to get the full political rights. So we thought that we don't need it because that happened already in 1905. But then we noticed that people can vote the bigger and bigger amounts of the women in the parliament. But what happens after that? I mean, in the government, in the state committees, in all such kind of the places where all the decisions are prepared. There they were all the time the huge majority of the men. And that's why I said that it was time for us about 20 years ago to open our eyes and notice that we need a quota. But in the elections, it differs which kind of the elections you have. We have the system where you vote one candidate from the list, so you can choose, and we did it always. So we could gather the female votes and the votes of the progressive men behind the women also. But study your election system, see whether you need a quota either in the elections or in the political parties, and also open your eyes to see what happens after the elections, because it might be so that the will of the people is not reflected as well as it could. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let us just go to our third panelist here, who, of course, hasn't had that many years yet to be, well, actually, it's not true. I mean, I'm sure that, you've now been mentored tremendously by being here. What have you learnt? What have you learnt from the women that you've been mentored by here?
Yeah, I was actually going to say that the only female mentor that I've ever had has been through the fellowship that I was placed in by the Council at the World Economic Forum. And it was Sadia Zahidi, who's the head of the Gender Parity and Women Leaders Program at the World Economic Forum. I grew up in Pakistan, actually, in the early 90s and late 80s, in a war that was sort of led by men. I grew up on the Pakistani side with a female prime minister, so my perspective of the role of women in terms of leadership in the public sector was muddy. But as we've seen, and we talked about Secretary Clinton earlier, I see it becoming more and more clear. And Sadia has been sort of the only female mentor and has been very influential because it has sort of led me to her leadership and her leadership style, which is interesting from the sort of perspective of the rest of the employees, was very cold and sort of stoic. But if she was replaced by a man who had the same style of leadership, I believe it would be seen as very effective. And so to see that from the outsider's perspective and learn from it has been very influential for me now at the World Bank.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, let's just go to what happens when women, of course, take on those leadership roles. I mean, Mary, you earlier made the point about women should be more innovative, you feel, when they actually get the reins of power, rather than just becoming, acting as if they're now part of the kind of the boys' club, in a sense. We've all seen that happen from time to time, but although I do think that women address problems very differently to the way men do. And one thing I'm really struck with in your great crusade on climate change is how your whole language of talking about climate change and your whole approach is very, very different, in a sense, to what we often see traditionally in talking about climate change. You've really focused not on the issues of the planet, but on the issues of people, and tremendously bringing alive the impact on women and children of these people who live out on the edge, being pushed even further out on the edge by these radical climate changes which lead to such terrible things as the famine in Somalia and so on. Just talk to me a little bit about that approach and how that is so particular in a sense, I think, anyway, maybe you'll correct me, on your gender.
No, I think it's true. I come to the climate issue from a human rights perspective, which may not surprise many people. And it was because I was doing work in my previous organisation, Realising Rights, in African countries on women, peace and security, on health, on decent work, on corporate responsibility. And we were very small and therefore partnered with a lot of other bigger partners. And we moved a lot. I moved in a lot of African countries. And I kept hearing what I call the but phrase. But the climate has changed. We have no seasons. We have prolonged drought and flooding. Our school has been destroyed. We are in desperate straits. And I realised that climate was actually affecting huge hundreds of thousands of citizens of African countries in different parts. The worst context of that was when I was in Somalia, again, last July. I was asked by the Irish aid agencies to go back to Somalia because I had been there when I was president in 1992, when at that time fighting warlords had prevented food getting to the feeding stations, and they were desperate. And I went as president, and I went to the UN and spoke to Boutros-Ghali and so on. And they said, please come back, because this time it's so much worse. And when I went there, I was really struck by all the factors were worse. It wasn't fighting warlords, and I had spoken to the two warlords in 1992 to let the food get in to the feeding stations. It was Al-Shabaab, linked to Al-Qaeda, so vicious in their own people, and you can't really open any lines of communication with them. When we were there in 1992, it was October, at the end of the dry season, and things were very serious, but we knew the rains would come, hopefully, in October. This time it was July, and while we were there, the United Nations declared famine. And they only declare famine under the most strict circumstances. And we were told that by that stage, at least 28,000 children had died of hunger. And the worst thing, not the worst thing, but the most interesting thing from my point of view, because we didn't even think about it in 1992, was that the Horn of Africa has had the 8 hottest years in succession ever. And therefore, this is not going to be a once-off. It probably won't be 19 years before another very serious drought in the whole Horn of Africa. And so we have to realise that very poor communities are not climate resilient. They're talking about the fact that we may have 200 million migrants who have to move because of drought or flooding from the places where they were born and reared by 2050. That's less than 40 years away. And so all of this brought me to establish the foundation in Ireland on climate justice. But then, if I may, I kind of was very interested in linking this with innovative women's leadership, because I realised, a number of us realised, that you actually had women's leadership at the top, interestingly, on the climate change issue, but it wasn't making the difference it needed to. Connie Hedegaard was the chair initially of Copenhagen, and then she became the Commissioner for Climate Action in Brussels. When we moved to Cancun, the chair was the Foreign Minister of Mexico, Patricia Espinosa, and the next chair was going to be Maite Mashaban of South Africa, the Minister for International Cooperation. So in Cancun, I was asked to moderate a panel a little bit like this, but it happened to be 5 women. Patricia Espinosa, the chair of the conference, Christiana Figueres, the executive secretary of the whole UNFCCC process, Connie Hedegaard, and the ministers for Denmark and Ecuador. We didn't get South Africa because the African group was meeting or something. And it was very interesting. What those women said at the meeting was, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak about gender. This is the first opportunity I've had to look at the gender dimensions. Of course, they are enormous. And I was listening and thinking, why should this be the first opportunity? Why should this be the first chance? And that really was like a bell ringing in my thing. And so we decided, in fact, it was Patricia Espinosa who mentioned it, that we would form a troika of women leaders and then build a troika plus. The troika being a kind of European idea of 3, and now there are various kinds of troikas. But that troika plus had real impact in South Africa. At the opening of the COP, you had 3 women on the stage, passing the baton from Mexico to South Africa in the presence of Christiana Figueres. All 3 of them made strong statements. We got more gender perspective than we've ever had. And we're linking that with women at grassroots, telling them there's now a platform of women leaders who are engaged, who know that it's actually a little bit like what happened in the Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening. People came out because social media had given them permission They knew that if they came out, there would be 10, 20, eventually hundreds, eventually thousands. So they came out. And the Troika Plus is saying Patricia Espinosa is going to make a statement because she knows that Mighty Mashaban will, and Mighty knows, in other words, there's a sort of opportunity and space for speaking much more strongly about gender issues at an international conference than otherwise would happen, because women are restrained by a kind of male overview. You know?
But also because, of course, when you talk about the stories of afflicted people, I mean, these are narratives which can dramatize an issue, and people almost tune out when they keep hearing about these issues which have been talked about and talked about and talked about, but it's very rarely, and it really has taken your kind of emotional content, in a sense, to bring that alive. And
I would call it impatience.
And impatience, but also the emotional content, because it's about caring and showing it. Margot, obviously you've done extraordinary work now in Congo with rape as a weapon of war. And last night you talked to me about a very, very moving thing which you described. You said that you had come to see this particular region in the Congo as the Valley of Sighs, because the women... Will you tell us why you called it the Valley of Sighs?
No, well, actually, we talked about two particular events. One visit to Eastern DRC, Walikale, where this young woman stood up in a public meeting and said, I have nothing to lose because I've already lost everything. She was about to get married, and the night before, this rebel group, the rebels, came to her house. They dragged her out of her house. She was gang raped and left almost dead by the road. She couldn't get married. She couldn't get any children. And she told us in the meeting that in this part of the DRC, a dead rat is worth more than a raped woman. And then I went to Sarajevo. And this is where afterwards I wrote in my diary that I call it the Valley of Sighs, because women would be, the word you used, very stoic. They would be, we talked about what has happened to them, the lack of access to justice for women, and the fact that they meet the perpetrator in the bank or in the local village, and he smiles at them, the daughter and the mother who were kept in one of these rape camps. And I said, don't you get angry? Don't you get upset? I said, not really, but we want to have access to justice. But they all sighed in the same way. And it was a sigh that would come from here, and they would have to raise their heads to sort of get it out. And they all sighed in the same way. And I don't think they even noticed, but that was something that kept me awake at night, I have to admit.
You know, to hear about that great sigh of pain, suppressed pain, is obviously the most heartbreaking thing. And my question is just, you're in your work, I mean, how are you trying to change the behavior and the response of the men in power to this issue? Because here we're hearing about something that is so obscene that it is still such a rampant thing. Rape as a weapon of war, it continues, it does not abate.
We are fighting three notions. The first is that this is inevitable as part of any, or a consequence of any war or conflict in the world, because it has been there from beginning of history. So we have to show that this is not inevitable, this is a criminal act, and it has to be treated as such. The second thing is that it is unspeakable, that these acts, they cannot be described because it has to do with sexuality. It's shameful, and very often the blame falls on the women, the victims or survivors, and not on the perpetrators. And the third notion is that this is a lesser crime. That is, why do you talk about rape? You have tortured, people being killed and tortured, and you have all other kinds of war crimes. But why would this be important enough? And at the same time, this is also where the women said, for example, in Sarajevo, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, they said, well, they have taken my life without killing me. This is how the woman sees it. So it has been now placed on the agenda of the Security Council, and we have to make it very concrete. We have to be able to say, we will fight impunity. There has to be consequences of committing this kind of atrocities. We have to use all the tools in the Security Council's toolbox, all the instruments that they have available to them. We have to be able to say to these perpetrators or groups that there will be an asset freeze. You will not have access to your bank accounts. Your family will not be able to travel. You will not get a visa. There can be sanctions against you. So they have to demonstrate that they are willing to use all these means. And we have to create and mobilize a political will and leadership on these issues, including President Kabila in the DRC and the whole government, and in all other countries where this is a huge problem. They have to stand up and say this has to come to an end. It is not, as Madeleine Albright said, it is not cultural, it's criminal, and that's how it has to be treated.
To Mary's point, when Mary got together this extraordinary group of women leaders, on the issue, in this wonderful Monrovia meeting in Sierra Leone. I mean, what can the women leaders hear, and there are many of them in the room, and part of Woodrow Wilson, etc. What can we all do, in a sense, to keep raising the political will issue, as you say, because it is about that political will, and it is about naming and shaming, but keeping up that pressure. And how can women really keep the focus and the heat up?
To keep talking about it, and what Mary has done, and what I think we contribute to as well, is to let the voices of these women be heard. And I cannot promise anything else, but I can say to these women, at least I'll make sure that I quote you, that I repeat what you've been telling me directly to the Security Council, the highest level at the international, on the international scene. Those who decide in the United Nations, and to get to the leaders of these governments. And Mary has done the same thing. She actually listened to the women on the ground that were the first ones to notice that something was wrong with the climate. They were the ones who noticed that the crops were not ready when they were supposed to, that the rain came later, or that things changed. They could not put a name on it. They maybe didn't know or have the notion of climate change, but they were the first ones to see the consequences of it. And I think to give them a voice, to give them a role, is extremely important, and we try to do the same. So you have to listen, you have to keep the discussion up, we have to keep it on the agenda of the Security Council. We have to do everything we can to provide help and assistance to the survivors. And we have to ask all political leaders to take full responsibility for this. And we have to change the military system and culture as well, because this is how modern wars are fought over the bodies of women. They have ended up on the front line of modern wars. And in some cases, this is the only thing that is being used by these military groups. No killings, no torture, but
last night,
rape.
Margot, last night, Margot, you made a very interesting observation, which I had never heard before, which is that the sort of almost the coded way that a military leader can talk to show that they are tacitly giving the okay to rape. When you talked about how Gaddafi had said, we will go house to house.
Yeah, at the end of
Libya, that was really a code for all bets are off now, we're in your bedrooms.
Absolutely, and this is also, again, what comes out from it's a short experience so far. We've only had this mandate for 2 years, but what comes out are these stories of women just doing their daily chores. They go to the field, they carry produce to the market, they go after water or firewood. They are taken sometimes out of their beds at night in their own homes. They are taken out, they are taken from the field. They are gang raped, they are abused, they are beaten, they are sometimes very often killed. And they are not soldiers, they are not fighters, they are just sort of trying to go on with their daily lives, and this is happening to so many of them. What is the real impact of this on a society, on a country, and their possibilities to restore peace and some kind of sustainable development in the country? So I'm also interested in making an economic study to look at what are the true costs of this being done to hundreds and thousands.
Very often it's the economic studies that can move things forward. I think that much of
You have to put a price tag on it, like with climate change. It's only then suddenly people start to take an interest.
Thank you. Sabrina, tell us, you've worked in Afghanistan, I know, right?
Yes. I've actually also worked in Eastern DRC, and we do the economic studies at the World Bank specifically. I'm working on a project where informal small traders, mostly women, are coming in and out of the DRC and Rwanda and other bordering countries and are being raped on the border by the border officials and are being bribed. There's a lot of corruption on the borders, and it's always surprising to even speak with people within institutions and you tell them that women prefer to be raped than to be bribed, because at least then they can take the food or the money back to their families. And we are doing a study on the impact of the rape and the corruption, the sexual and gender-based violence on the productivity of the women, and sort of are at the midline level. And at the World Bank, we're trying to push this rigorous quantitative sort of analytical work on the impact of different interventions on gender, on women, and it's been difficult. It's difficult to push the issue within the World Bank and outside, but the recent World Development Report was on gender, and to open up people's eyes and unfortunately to put the human rights argument aside for a little bit and make the economic one. At the World Economic Forum, it was the same argument. The stakeholders are members of the economic community, and they need to see what the cost-benefit analysis looks like.
Well, I mean, do you feel, and I'm interested to hear what you think, Mary, now about this, is do women bring new tools to making new arguments? I mean, obviously, if you're fresh in a sense to power, fresher to power in a sense than the kind of old patriarchal way of doing things, what is it that you can bring in that sort of search for new tools? I mean, such as you did in a sense with climate justice. I mean, that's a new idea, really, climate justice. I mean, how much are you seeing of women doing that?
Well, just before I respond, I mean, when you say about new tools, actually Margot is a new tool herself. As she said, she has her mandate for the last 2 years. Before that, there was nobody championing this issue globally. There was nobody who was listening and bringing out the voices, and nobody arguing about impunity, and nobody addressing the Security Council, which Margot does quite frequently. And that's a huge channel. That's a huge new way. And it's important that her mandate gets a lot of support. I was very pleased to see that the United States has adopted a plan of action under the famous Security Council Resolution 1325. I'm glad to say that Ireland beat the United States by a matter of weeks. We were late enough ourselves, and we just managed to get there before. But to come back to, sorry, what was your main question?
Well,
again?
My question is finding new methods and new tools to tell the stories that people haven't wanted to hear.
Yeah, I think first of all, women do have a sense of the importance of listening to the realities on the ground and bringing those realities out. And they are extraordinarily strong in climate because they also bring out a justice dimension. Those poor people who are most affected by climate at the moment are not contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions. And my friend Constance O'Kellett from Uganda brought this out very well. Constance lives in northern Uganda. She's a mother of 8, and she was a strong woman in her village. But when she was growing up, she said they had a poor but adequate and happy enough life. They had seasons, they sowed, they harvested, etc. And then this terrible change came about, and for the last 5 or 6 years in that part of Uganda, it's been long, long periods of drought and then flash flooding that runs off the dry land, and the school has been destroyed. So she leads a women's group that are holding the community together. And actually, it was Oxfam who found her, sort of brought her out as one of the champions, climate-wise women, as she's now organised in a small group as. And she then, as she tells the story, says, and so at first when this weather change happened, we thought God was punishing us. And then I realised, as I learned more, that it actually is the lifestyles of rich people. And I thought that was really interesting, and it's something that we have to think about. It's not done deliberately, it's not done consciously, but in reality, the greenhouse gas emission impact is not as bad in countries like the United States or countries of Europe. And even when it happens, and is happening to a certain extent, even here in the United States, it's a climate resilient country. Now, there are costs, all right, but it's climate resilient. In these places, they're not climate resilient. And so the very poor lifestyles become undermined. There are health implications. The school gets destroyed, the community gets... And I remember sitting with Archbishop Desmond Tutu before the Copenhagen conference at a hearing that Oxfam had organised in Cape Town, where we were to listen to 5 African farmers from 5 different African countries. And interestingly and validly, 4 of those 5 were women, because over 80% of the farming in Africa is done by women, though they only own about 2% of the land. So that's a nice disproportion as well. But I remember still those 5 accounts. The South African was a rooibos tea farmer, and she looked haggard. I'd say she was a lot younger than she looked with her husband, and she'd had a moderate income. But a few years ago, the climate had changed in that part of South Africa, and her tea farm was destroyed, her rooibos farm. In Kenya, it was the only man, and he was down to his last 20 herd of goats. He'd had 200, and you could tell he believed that in a year's time he wouldn't have any because of prolonged drought. In Mali, it was a cotton farmer, a woman, who described the flooding and so on. The worst was Malawi, the last person to speak, and she said, it's gone so bad through flooding and destroying of any livelihoods for us that women are now selling their bodies, but I can't because I know I'm HIV positive.
Oh, God.
And you know that when you get to that stage, and these, in a way, these stories I think stay with us as women because we actually identify. We're mothers, we're grandmothers, and we get it. And I think that certainly from a climate perspective, I believe that this is the way that we'll get a sense of urgency and togetherness to address this issue. The Troika,
by telling those stories.
By telling the stories and by having this platform of women leaders, the Troika Plus, committed to bringing out the gender dimensions. The gender dimensions are very clear because it's women who have to pick up the pieces on a very negative situation. But we're now going forward to 2 conferences where the Troika will be present. One is the Commission on the Status of Women in New York in March, which is on rural women. So rural women are very affected in poor countries by climate, and we'll be listening to them. And then Rio Plus 20, access to energy. Energy is a very male-dominated sphere. But there are great gender dimensions to energy, to how energy is used, to the kind of energy. 1.4 billion people in our world today have no access to electricity. So they use kerosene or candles. Kerosene is highly destructive, highly dangerous, and in fact expensive now in comparison to what we can do with solar, as I understand it. We can have off-grid solar projects that give solar potential to people at the price that they now pay for kerosene. So the potential for a huge change if we can get the gender dimensions at the Rio conference brought out adequately. And I'm glad to say that the president of Brazil, Dilma, is very strong on empowerment of women. We've already talked about the Troika, and hopefully there will be that opportunity. So it's a bottom-up, the stories and the livelihoods of women, and it's a top-down, women leaders listening and saying, we're going to change things.
Yeah,
it's not business as usual.
That's actually very exciting because it's really about looking at human rights and social justice sort of through the prism of women, and also, of course, looking at women through that prism in reverse. So it is a very innovative approach. Margot, what are the most effective things that you've seen in your crusade, the things that have moved the needle? I mean, you've got a long way, as you say, with this UN commitment now. I mean, what were the key factors that drove that from your point of view?
We have only started.
Yeah.
This is not done in a coffee break, of course. And I would say that thanks to the support and the backing of the United States, because without the very ambitious resolutions and the political will manifested through these resolutions and keeping it on the Security Council's agenda, we would not be able to move it forward. Where we have to make a breakthrough is on impunity, fighting impunity, because we have to start to show that there are consequences.
And that's obviously mostly about co-opting the minds of men. I mean, what sort of work are you doing to try to do that? Because without their absolute partnership and cooperation, I know there are many terrific men working in this field who feel as outraged as every woman does.
And they can see, we have to demonstrate the effects of this on a society, as you said also, Women are very often the backbone of the local economy in their villages. They are the ones who take care. They carry everything, as I always say. They carry children, responsibility. They carry water, firewood, and all of those things. They do most of the work, and to show the communities and the leaders as well that women will not be able to carry out their tasks if this is being done to them.
So it's really pushing that economic argument.
And social and legal arguments as well, and then help them to make sure that the legal system can address these problems and can work with these cases and provide justice to women. But as I said, we've only started. We cannot be satisfied in any way with what we have achieved so far. We have to go on, and we have to mobilize wise men as well. And one of the things that is very problematic is the fact that, again, the stigma and the fact that the shame and blame falls on the women and not on the perpetrators. So very often they are shunned by their husbands and their families as well. And it means, of course, that they cannot take responsibility for their families or be reintegrated. And this is something that is based very often on ignorance and prejudice, and we just have to change that, including with the help of, for example, religious leaders and village chiefs and others. But it is so painful to hear their stories about what happens afterwards.
Sabrina, what kind of success have you seen of women who have brought something to the table and made a great difference? I mean, have you ever, in your work so far, even in whether it's a bigger situation or a smaller one, have you seen how a woman's presence has changed the dynamic?
I think more so in my growing up, as I mentioned, in Pakistan during the Afghan war, what I saw was sort of the position of my own mother, who was leading a household full of multiple families and sort of rebel fighters coming in for rest during the war and going back out, and seeing sort of her management role from the economic perspective and managing that household to her role in sort of supporting this revolution. Seeing how influential one woman can be in sort of serving as the foundation for and sort of the source of stability for so many men, I think has been very influential for me. And I see women like my mother in Eastern Congo, in Afghanistan now, and
who are the rocks? You mean of the
who are the rocks? Who are the productivity? Who are sort of the teachers, who are the mothers, and everything else for their community and their families.
I'd like to thank you. I mean, your mother sounds amazing. Is she still there?
She's actually working in Kabul, right, in education and in a vocational college, and sort of is the rock now for hundreds of women who have never had a woman buy sanitary napkins for them or heating pads. When she goes home for the holidays or comes to the U.S. and goes back, I mean, they literally all jump on top of her because they're so happy she's here, because they've never had a role model, and these girls are between the age of 17 and 25.
And what is their view of their future now America is heading out of there? I mean, are they optimistic or are they anxious?
I think there's a lot of anxiety. There is a bit of sort of self-selection in terms of these women because they are in an institution funded by USAID. They are educated enough to sort of get through the process to be in a vocational college, and they have job fairs and have economic opportunities. I think there's a lot of anxiety because of the fear of what was the Taliban, pre the Taliban, sort of the conditions that allowed the Taliban to be welcomed into the country without a huge fight, and it's a generation that has sort of grown up during this war. I mean, it's gone on for long enough that these women who are now 20, were 10 when it started. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety because there's not a lot of clarity in terms of what's next for them and how it's going to impact their schooling or their job opportunities.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to just turn now to the amazing women in the audience, because with so many brilliant leaders here, that I'd love to hear to now throw open to questions for our panel. So anybody would like to ask a question? Shall I go to Jane first of all? Or? Yeah, we need the microphone to...
I could start it without. I just have to observe. Wouldn't we all like to see Sabrina as a future president of Afghanistan?
I'm an American citizen.
This panel is fabulous, and there's a more personal set of questions that I don't think we have gotten to yet, Tina. That's why I just wanted to raise one, and that is about personal courage. You know, when you have any of your jobs, that includes yours, Tina, you put yourself out there. Everybody is nodding. You all understand that. And that can be good, and it can also be enormously personally painful when people come after you in various ways. You also, if you have a family, you say, you make a statement to your family. I hope that, I mean, I'm obviously personalizing this, that by doing these things that I'm passionate about, I hope I am teaching something to a family about this. But there's an element of selfishness to it, too. You're taking time away from a family. And so I just thought we might ask Tina, including of you, my friend, how did you develop personal courage? And in Margot's case, I know, by the way, that she lives in New York to do this amazing job, and her family, including teenage children, live in Sweden, and she commutes. Try that commute. So how did you develop the personal courage, and what advice do you have about how to do that?
Why don't I start with Mary? Because, well, I was skipping around there. Well, I mean, I know what I will answer this passion. You know, I mean, I think passion, it's like a love affair. I mean, it overrides everything. And it's that passion which carries you forward. And so very often you storm ahead and you don't really look to left and right. And if you knew more, you probably might not do it. But it's just that passion that carries you forward. So certainly in my case, it has been passion. And also, you know, I think you develop a kind of energy from the assaults too. You know, that in a strange way, the more you're trying to be thwarted or degraded or, you know, put down, you develop energy from that and turn that into a kind of positive momentum. And it can either sort of slay you or it does the reverse. I mean, listening to the President of Finland, I got a sense that he was a tenacious and somebody who probably just, you know, would take a negative force and just turn it around into being more momentum for the future. I do think that I've also gained a lot of strength from my friendships with other women, and I do think women are force multipliers when they're together. I have an immensely great group of very, very strong women friends who are themselves forging ahead and doing innovative, interesting things. And that group, when we meet, I mean, I have so many of them, I am full of admiration for them, and there always seems to be one of them who's doing something so much more difficult than I am. So that's really what's forged my sort of momentum, I suppose, and desire to, you know, keep going. But Mary, I was very interested about you because I read that when you, you know, when you finally realized that you were going to be elected president, your first thought was for your family, about what's going to happen to your family. I certainly know that in my case it was. I mean, when I was offered the editorship of The New Yorker, my first thought was not what a great job. It was like, oh my God, Izzy's too, you know, how am I going to do this? And I turned immediately to my mother and brought her over. So there was an example where without my mother, without that mentoring, willingness and nurturing of my own mother to come and help me, I couldn't have possibly done what I did, which is a very important factor, I think, in so many women's lives. And I'm interested with Mary because you have 4 children, isn't it?
3 children and 4 grandchildren.
3 children and 4 grandchildren, and obviously a very strong marriage too. I mean, how have you balanced all of that?
Well, it helps to have a very understanding spouse who is very supportive. But on the courage thing, I actually had a real early experience, and I sometimes talk about it to young people because I think it is a learning experience. As Tarja Halonen said, I was fortunate enough to start quite early. I was elected to the Irish Senate at the age of 25, and I had a passion for an issue, a lot of issues, but in particular the need to reform family planning in Ireland. And it was very logical because married women couldn't obtain the contraceptive pill in Ireland unless their doctor prescribed that they had cycle regulation problems. So it must have been the weather, Tina. An awful lot of women in Ireland had cycle regulation. You know? And it was against the criminal law to either buy or sell a condom but it wasn't against the law at all to use a condom. Just to, and so there was a law of 1935 that it was possible to introduce quite a modest amendment to cure that part of it. And I got 2 male senators to join with me, and we tabled the bill. And I completely underestimated the reaction in 1971 in Catholic Ireland. I was denounced from pulpits. I'm of Catholic background. My parents were very religious. It was very tough. And I remember I actually wobbled. I mean, there was one time going down the main street in Dublin, Grafton Street, where I thought people were going to come out and somehow accuse me. And I was really getting depressed. I was getting hate mail. And eventually we got married that year. My about-to-be husband, Nick, burned a lot of the letters, which I now regret because they were an archive, of material.
Snapshot of a time.
But nothing afterwards was ever as difficult as keeping on and saying, I believe that we need to do this. And we brought in further private members' bills over a couple of years. And then eventually, about 10 years later, the Irish government brought in what they called the Irish solution to an Irish problem, a sort of improvement. And now it's not an issue in Ireland. But I still retain that issue because it is such an issue globally. And at the moment, I chair yet another body, the Global Leaders Council on Reproductive Health, which is 16 of us trying to highlight that this is a mainstream issue of women's empowerment and women's rights. And in every culture and every situation, it has to be championed. And yet an awful lot of people avoid it, will not talk about family planning, will not talk about these issues.
Well, that's also to Margot's point about not wanting to talk about rape because it's has a sexual connotation as opposed to a very, a criminal one. Margot, what about, to answer Jane's question, what has fueled your ability to withstand
I wrote down something that Wangari Maathai said. The clarity of what you ought to do gives you courage, removes the fear, gives you the courage to ask. There is so much you do not know and you need to know. And I think this was a wonderful quote. I add my voice to yours, saying that it starts with passion for something. You believe that you want to engage in international issues, or you want to show solidarity, or you want to fight an injustice, and it starts with that. But I also agree that it takes courage, and you have to be honest enough to say to people that it takes courage, it takes a lot of fighting, and you have to be able to stand up. And I miss a lot of that personal courage today. I think that we need more courageous people who say that I'm willing to take some flack also for what I'm doing and what I stand up for, and then to look for people who can give you the support and you need to be able to talk to others with the same kind of experience and maybe whine a bit and cry and laugh with others. And it's not easy, and you also sacrifice quite a few things. And the truth is that Sundays when my son plays the guitar on Skype, and I think, why am I here and why are they
I thought that is it Helen from Bermuda? Is she here today? Yeah, I thought you spoke very interestingly about that issue at dinner last night when you talked about how women can't have everything all at once, and the need to understand the serial moments in a woman's life and the nurturing part being still respected, as Jane spoke. Do you want to just mention that again, what you said last night? I thought it was very powerful.
Well, realistically, women can have anything they want. They just can't have everything they want, at least not all at the same time. When you make a choice to be involved in public office and you have a family, you have to really be aware of what your choices, the effect that your choices will have on your family and the people you love around you. It's sometimes, for instance, in America or any of the larger countries, it's a security risk. You're putting your family at risk. As an individual, as a woman, you also have to be more concerned about the fact that if you're going to be moving forward, you really want to know that the support base is at least there with you and for you. And so we need to find a way to, as I had said last night, each one reach one, each one teach one. You have the women who can help one another as opposed to finding ways to be more divisive and to find ways to pull us apart. We need to find ways to just move forward as a more homogenous, more unified group. The things like race should not separate us. The fact that we have passion for the fact that we want to make significant changes, these are the things that should be the driving force for us. But I recognize that families are the main reason that we have such significant issues in politics, and I believe that that's one of the reasons that you don't find as many women coming forward. When you look at the primaries and you look at people who are running in politics nowadays, the first thing they do is they go after you and your ethical background. They try to dig up every piece of dirt that they can find on you, and they are not driven on the fact that you are taking a stand. And it's largely because we seem to have become countries involved in more single-issue politics. We're more concerned about the little things as opposed to looking at the big picture.
Thank
And
you.
you have to find the right partner. You have to marry the right guy.
That helps. I've been lucky there too, as Jane was with her brilliant and wonderful husband, Sydney. We've probably got time for two more questions, I would think. I think you had your hand up first, so.
Hi, my name is Penny Starr. I'm with CNS News. I know you've talked about part of the work for the council is encouraging and bringing up the future leaders, and you've also talked about taking action on things like climate change that affect women disproportionately. I wondered if the council takes a stand or is involved at all in sex selection abortion. This is an issue in China where they say millions of females have been aborted, and with the one-child policy, and now this practice is also taking place in India and other places. And I wondered if the council is taking a stand or getting involved in that as far as gender issues.
I don't know whether Laura wants to answer that. I think the council is unlikely to take that kind of a stand. It's not that kind of a body. It's women who have joined the council because they qualify as former presidents or prime ministers or the ministerial level that Margot chairs, to empower, to support, to make visible and to listen to the voices of women. So that issue would be more appropriate to some other kind of activist group. The nearest I can come to it is, because it was mentioned briefly, is the elders that I belong to, which is brought together by Nelson Mandela and Graça Machel. We have identified the issue of child marriage as being an issue that is one that interests us because we had made a strong statement about the influence of religion and tradition. We believe that religion and tradition are often distorted to subjugate women, and that's one of the backdrop issues, if you like, culturally in a lot of environments. And so we made a very strong statement about that, and then this is the follow-through, because marriage is not a purely private affair, it's a public engagement. And we were very taken aback, I think. I certainly was, and I know Archbishop Tutu and others of the elders have spoken, at the numbers involved, that more than 10 million girls a year marry way below the age of 15 or 16. You know, we went to Ethiopia, where the law says that nobody should marry under the age of 18. So the law is fine by the Convention on the Rights of the Child, if you like. But in reality, in the Tamara region where we were, the average age of girls to marry was 12. And there were poverty reasons for this, there were cultural reasons for this, and the only way to address it was in the community itself, to get the religious leaders, the men, the women, and to emphasize the importance for the community of girls staying in school and the value to the community of the girls when they stayed in school and became better equipped to be more productive in their community, etc., and to discuss this. We saw projects doing that. I would say that, again, the issue that you're talking about has to be addressed from within in a somewhat similar way.
but the council can give support to, of course, a leader that brings that issue into the network and say, can I talk to somebody else that will want to engage, and so they will find the support. But it's not a political body per se where you would have a political agenda like that. But of course you can bring it to the other leaders and ask, so how do you think we should tackle this? Can we get some help and support? So that's the idea of the network.
We have to wrap up really now, but I'll just take one more question, and how about this?
Hi, Joan Michelson. I'd like to get practical for a moment. The reality of both the governmental and the corporate structures we live in is that they're driven by consensus. We have to get votes, we have to get support to make things happen. And yet when you're leading change, you're daring to be different, you're rocking the boat, it's hard to get people to come along with you. So in order to facilitate the change and get the support, what are some of the tactics? Can you give us some guidance on language, on tactics, on reading your audience, on I come at this from a marketing communications perspective. How do you decide how to know your audience, the words to look for and use? Because we really want to be, as President Robinson said, effective leaders and effectively drive innovation. And there's no roadmap for doing what we're doing.
I'm going to call on Laura.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, perhaps would
well,
someone
I'm
else
not
take
sure
that
if
question?
I'm making it as practical as you would wish, but it's from the understanding that we need to accelerate the change that we want, that we're trying to create context for women, work in solidarity together, reinforce each other, listen to each other, connect with each other. And part of the connection is the connection between women at grassroots and women in leadership. I'll be going to Addis Ababa in a couple of weeks' time for a meeting of an umbrella network of women on women, peace and security called Gender is My Agenda, GMAC as it's called. I've been there for the last couple of years. And we will be talking about issues of women at grassroots, especially in conflict areas, the kind of issues that Margaret has been talking about, but also economic issues. Now, we will bring that to the Commission on the Status of Women with Michelle Bachelet and UN Women and Margaret and others. And then we will try to bring it to Rio Plus 20 in the context of access to energy. What would it mean to have light in the home, the children able to study, the woman freed up from going miles for firewood, or the nasty damage that is done to lungs and fire, etc., from kerosene? It's a terrible form of it. So there are projects now of access to energy. This is the year of access to energy for all. But if you look at the UN literature, and I don't mean to be too critical about this, it is not gender sensitive. And I was looking at the latest outcome, preparing for Rio. Wow, it talks about end users. It doesn't talk about the fact that these end users happen to be women or men in their families and what that
language
means.
is extraordinarily important.
So, I think you get practical in your context. How can you enlarge what you're doing, scale up what you're doing? So,
One sentence maybe to say, it helps to know the most common methods for suppression also, how to suppress women, make them invisible. You create networks where they are excluded. So there are a number of, and I think there are researchers that have created those 5 methods for making women, to exclude women. I think you can look out for them as well. That's more practical and
Sabrina,
more psychological.
Any last thought on that from you? Otherwise I will wrap up.
I look towards my own heroes and my own leaders for that kind of advice in terms of effective leadership. I mean, I'm still learning, and I do already sort of see sort of this exclusionary tactic, and I've seen it, as soon as I left college, and so I hope to be able to provide lessons later.
All right, well, thank you so much, and thank you, Jane Harman, for bringing this conversation forth, and thank you, my wonderful, inspiring panelists.
And thank you, Tina. If anyone doubted that we have the right tagline, a force multiplier, I think everyone now understands what that means. It means courageous women finding linkages through courage and stories to move to the next level. And I don't know of more courageous women than the women who have sought and achieved the leadership, the highest leadership position as a head of state or a head of a country. I don't mean that they're the only courageous women, but that is a form of courage, let me tell you, as a recovering politician, that I don't think I possess, and that very, very few women do possess. And then to be, as Mary Robinson is, someone who, after she has held power, is continuing to lead through a variety of organizations. It's pretty damn impressive. So thank you to this panel for everything you do. Don't move, because Mary asked such an important question about innovation. And the innovator who is responsible for the Council of Women World Leaders, Laura Listwood, was honored last night by some of us. She's here, and she will close this conversation. Laura has had an enormous variety of jobs. I would think that of the people who possess an MBA from Harvard, she probably is the most unusual of any of them. Among her various careers, after 9/11, she felt it very important to help protect public safety, and she trained and then became a member of the Washington, D.C. Police Department. So try that. And Laura is not just the founder, but the Secretary General of the Council of World Women Leaders. She will continue in this role at the Wilson Center. She does a variety of other things. Diversity training is one of her other gigs. But Laura, please complete the circle here and talk about where we've come from and how we go forward. Please welcome Laura Listwood.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jane, for that, and the panel. And this has been an extraordinary journey for women and for myself. The journey did start with one of those questions that we all have randomly, and this one was what it would be like if a woman were President of the United States. It wasn't such a random question, because the Center for American Women in Politics had done some research and found that women state legislators actually legislated differently than men. And I thought that was interesting, what might happen if a woman were President of the United States, but of course there was no one in the United States to ask that question to. But there were 15 women living at the time who were President or Prime Minister of their country, and I thought, well, perhaps I could meet one of them. I have no idea why I thought I could meet one, but I did, and just sort of cut to the chase. After 18 months, I had met all 15 of the world leaders. Not one of the world leaders turned me down, although admittedly Margaret Thatcher said, come back after you've met everyone else. But one of the first people who agreed to an interview was Mary Robinson, and she was incredibly gracious to me with her time and her energy and her thoughts. And it actually, I never told Mary this, but it actually did help me, because when I went for the interviews with the other leaders, they didn't know who I was, but I had met Mary Robinson. So that was actually enough credential for me to get into the door. And I did find that hearing very similar stories that these women had experienced. And in fact, my interviews with the world leaders were getting longer and longer and longer, because I was telling them what the others had to say in response to my questions. But then we did think about the idea of bringing them together, and we did have a summit in Stockholm, as Mary indicated, and Mary was the first to agree to the idea of the summit and to the council idea, and then, as only Mary can do, she asked President Vigdis to chair the council, which he agreed to, but then, as good as her word, she also took on the role of the chair and was incredibly instrumental in strengthening our work as the council. She turned down my request for her to be chair for life, Mary did, and then said that perhaps we should go every 4 years for a new chair. We did. And we put the council at the Kennedy School of Government at first. And I was always reminded why I was doing this work as I would walk through the John F. Kennedy Park, because there's a long granite slab on the John F. Kennedy Park, and there's an engraving in it. And let me read it to you, because it always reminds me of why I'm doing this work. It says, when at some future date, the High Court of History sits in judgment, our success or failure in whatever office we hold will be measured by the answers to 4 questions. Were we truly men of courage? Were we truly men of dedication? Were we truly men of integrity? Were we truly men of judgment? And I would read that, and I would think to myself, such good questions to ask men. But of course, they're good questions to ask women, too. And the way I look at it is that the world's agenda does get set. Resources do get allocated. Voices get heard or get silenced. Attention is given or it is not. People control that. And women have needed and still need, in my mind, to be equally on that world stage where those resources are allocated, where the voices are heard, where the attention is given. And I think the Council has been able to, and I think will even be more able to do this at the Wilson Center, to be a convening power, to help make women's voices heard. As Mary's referenced several times about the grassroots and the top-level leadership, I always refer to the Filipino women, because they have this great saying. Filipino women say, to cook rice cakes, you need heat at the top and heat at the bottom. And it's the same thing with women's issues. You need both. You need both. And the UN conference in Beijing, which many of us, I think, were involved with, was a milestone. And since then, women have been moved further and further along the path to equality and power. But we still need to do what I call hurry history. And importantly, we need to encourage the emerging women leaders. They need our support. In observing the women leaders, such as the ones we've heard today and the ones I had an opportunity to meet, I too learned it takes courage to be a leader, to move from being in the crowd to standing in front of the crowd, to have your voice and your ideas be challenged. And I told this story last night when I interviewed President Corazon Aquino. She told me that 2 weeks before her husband, Benigno Aquino, was assassinated, and he was to be president of the Philippines, they were talking, and he said to her, whoever follows Ferdinand Marcos will have an impossible task, never imagining it'd be his wife who followed Marcos in that task. It took an enormous amount of courage. I learned from Gro Brundtland, Prime Minister of Norway, when I asked her, why did you have 50% women and 50% men in your cabinet? And she said, I can't make a wise decision otherwise. That pretty well captured that. I did learn from Mary Robinson what it means to be what I call a conscious leader. A conscious leader. Someone who understands what the situation requires and then uses their leadership skills to help change that situation or help impact that situation, rather than just being an intuitive leader. She's both an intuitive leader and a conscious leader. I learned from Prime Minister of Canada, Kim Campbell, of the use of humor. Kim would constantly remind me that Americans think Canadians are just unarmed Americans with health insurance. Humor always works. I did learn from President Halonen the value of that integrating of women and other issues, environment, security, being at the table. I learned from Margot Wallstrom that strong leaders tackle the hard truths and tell us the hard things we need to hear. I learned from Premier Pamela Gordon that you do need to reach down and help the next one. I learned from Prime Minister Dame Eugenia of Dominica, who passed away several years ago, about that issue of passion, which we've heard. And she said, I would give up if I didn't have a passion for what I was doing. That over-scrutiny that women get, that tolerance, that less tolerance for mistakes that women get. I would give up if I didn't have a passion for what I was doing. Although a cautionary note to that one, as I remember a football coach telling me about passion, and he said, some people think they want to be matadors, just to find themselves in the ring with 2,000 pounds of bull bearing down upon them. And what they realized is what they really wanted was to wear tight pants and hear the crowd roar. Be cautious of knowing what your passion is. Yeah. And passion is very important, but so is something that you've heard here today, which is that you need practical action behind the passion. I think the best definition I have ever found of a leader is what Vivaldi said made the best composer. He said the best composer has a cool head and a hot heart. And that's what it takes. You can't just have one without the other. You have to have both in that. I learned from President Vigdis of the power of women to create change, to create the new way, by using women forcefully. I remember and maybe it comes from Iceland because of their weather, but I heard a phrase there which said, "Women are like snowflakes. One alone may melt, but together we can stop traffic." that power of women to change things. And I think change actually goes from the unthinkable to the impossible to the inevitable. But it just takes some people who are willing to move on that path. Tacitus said that the worst crimes were dared by a few, willed by more, and tolerated by all. Well, change is the exact same way. It's dared by a few, it's willed by more, and then it's accepted by all. But you have to ask yourself, where do you want to be on that? Do you be one of the people who are daring things to create change, like these women leaders are? Are you willing to come into it? It's sort of at the beginning, but not quite at the beginning. Or are you just going to be the ones who just accept the change? I'm always reminded of this when I watch a standing ovation. Ever watch a standing ovation? Few people jump up. This is the best thing I've ever seen. Right? Then a larger group gets up and goes, yeah, this was really good. Then the large group gets up because they go, yeah, it's okay. And finally the last group gets up because they can't see the stage. Change is exactly the same way. And we each have to decide ourselves where we're going to be in that. Now, it's not my custom to ordinarily quote Donald Rumsfeld, the former Secretary of Defense in the United States. But he spoke of the known knowns and the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. But there's also the unknown knowns. That is, we already know something about something, but we don't act upon it. We already know something. And in the case of women and girls, we know a lot already, but the world, in some instances, chooses to ignore that which we know. We know, for example, that educating girls leads to lower mortality rates for women, higher incomes, healthier families. We know that violence against women depletes the individual, the family, the community, and our civilized society. We know women in the workforce help drive a country's growth and economy. We know a country's potential is never reached if 50% of its population is not fully a part of the society. And Margot, we know there is no glass ceiling. It is just a thick layer of men. We know that. We know these things, but sometimes we choose to ignore them. It has been and continues to be my honor to be part of the Council of Women World Leaders. We've convened summits of world leaders. We've convened women ministers. We've created coalitions. We have brought some new research to light. We've created a student leaders program, the evidence of which you see here today. And I think and I hope that Mary will agree we've stimulated others in their own pursuit of women and girls' well-being. I'd like to end this by a quote from Václav Havel, who just recently died, because he talked about the myth of Sisyphus. Remember Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill just to watch it roll back down? Right. He said, imagine if one fine day Sisyphus pushed the rock up the hill and it failed to roll back down. It would be a sensation of Sisyphus mentally unprepared for the possibility his efforts might succeed. A Sisyphus who'd lost its old purpose and hadn't yet developed a new one. Well, I think we as women, in the work that we're all doing here and elsewhere, that we've actually been pushing this rock up the hill, and it's actually at the top of the hill, and it's not rolling back down. And so now it's our time. It's our time to have the vision of the world that we want to see. It's our time to have our voices heard. It's our time to make the changes we want to see. And Jane, I want to thank you for being so willing. And Jane didn't come after me. I went to Jane, and she said yes immediately when she saw the council and her visionary leadership around accepting us into the Wilson family. And I want to thank the Wilson family for accepting us so very much. And to thank Pina, I know that she had to leave, and President Robinson for everything you've done for me personally and for the council. And Margaret, some of the fun times we've actually had together in this process. Sabrina, thank you for your words and being such a great graduate leader for this. And again, to thank you, in the audience for being interested in this and being supportive of the council. Joe Gildenhorn, thank you. The chair of the Wilson Center, Alma, thank you for always being supportive of the council. And together, we will stop traffic. Thank you.